I'd just come back from operations externally, and I was on my first day back in town on R&R, and it was early in the morning, and I decided to go and stand in the sun a little bit, and when there was no pressure, and enjoy looking at the avenues that were in full bloom. And this car pulled up next to me. It was somebody who I knew from Special Branch, and he knew me obviously, and he said, "Hi, how's it?" And I said, "It's fine." And he said, "How would you like to train a hit squad?" And I said, "No, thank you," because that was obviously a police initiative, and I'd had enough of them. I'd been in PARTU, which stands for Police Anti-Terrorist Unit, for a number of years, and although it was no fault of PARTU, I just didn't have the action that I actually wanted, and I'd gone through the labours of passing SAS selection course, which was very extremely tough, and I wasn't going to forfeit my position to go back to where I'd just come from. So I said, "No thanks, not interested." Anyway, he persuaded me to go for an interview, and he said, "Just come and listen." He said, "You don't have to accept anything." I said, "Well, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to accept anything, but I'll go along." And I went along and met the chief, who was actually just a special branch superintendent, but I called him the chief because we dealt with other special branch superintendents, and I wanted to give him a brand name so that people would know who I'm talking about. Anyway, about 3 days later, there was a banging on my door, and I opened it, and there was the chief. And he said, "You've got to come right now. There's been a mutiny. 100 former terrorists who had accepted amnesty under the settlement, internal settlement the government offered to all dissidents. They were put in a secret training camp to be trained and armed with the idea that they would be deployed back to the villages and to defend their own families against insurgents who did not want to stop fighting the war." They said that they had cleared it with the SAS, which they hadn't. But I think what the superintendent or the chief was trying to organize was that I would solve the mutiny before my R&R was up, and then there would be no problem. And so I believed him. He said the problem was that these were Muzorewa's supporters. Now, Muzorewa was one of the leaders of the dissidents. There was Mugabe and Como, Sitoli, and Muzorewa were the chief leaders of the black nationalists. And the group that were in this, of dissidents that were in this camp, were Muzorewa's followers. And Muzorewa was heading up the coalition government at that time, so he couldn't see or be seen to tolerate his own supporters being shot dead by Fire Force. But Fire Force was put on standby because we knew that they were heavily armed and angry, and we felt that they would probably go back to fighting the war. Fire Force, which was the RLI actually, they were doing 2 or 3 different deployments a day to different contacts that were going on. That was the intensity of the war. And so they were put on standby to go and take out this 100 I'll just call them gooks because that's what they were. And as I say, Muzorewa could not be seen to accept them, his own people being gunned down. So the chief wanted me to go and sort out the mutiny, if at all possible. If it wasn't possible, then all I had to do was to call them on the radio and say, "You can forget about any settlement here," and they would send Fire Force in. It was touch and go. So the coalition government was actually at risk at that time. I followed him and his convoy. Now, he had about 4 vehicles, if I can remember correctly, plus a number of staff that went with. And we drove to a farm which was in the remote area, and where the secret training camp was based. And on the way there, I started to wonder how to deal with this mutiny, and it came to mind that it would be better if I went in on my own, because I would pose less of a threat to the terrorists that way and had more chance of keeping them as calm as possible. So when it got to the farm, I told the chief that I'd prefer to go in on my own, but they should stand by just in case there was any action, and maybe they could give me some backup. Luckily, I had my RPD with me, which is a light machine gun, and I always carried 10 belts with 100 rounds in each belt. So I had 1,000 rounds plus a couple of grenades, and I could put up a good fight if it came to it. So on the way into this terrorist camp, which was really a track through the bush, I had a Land Rover, which was a police Land Rover they gave me to use, and I came across a ridge which was probably about 30 meters wide and several meters high. I hid the Land Rover in the bush behind this ridge, and I climbed up, and I could see it was overlooking the camp, and I watched these 100 mutineers milling around, and it looked to me like they were waiting for something to happen from our side, but they weren't deploying or absconding. So I stood on a big boulder overlooking the camp, made myself visible to them, and I whistled loudly, and I called them across. And I could see that there was a bit of activity, and the next thing, 5 of them came across to me, and I asked them what their problem was. And they said to me that some of them had been wounded during the course of training, and they weren't satisfied with the standard of training, and they chased the instructors out under threat of death. And from there, I went with the 5 to where the others were. They were all glowering at me and cocking their weapons to show that if there was going to be a fight, that they were willing to engage with that. So I got them to sit down, and I spoke to them, and I examined the 8 that had been shot. They had bullet holes through the buttocks and legs. Fortunately, they were just flesh wounds. None were damaged any bones or anything like that. And then I told them, I said, this is totally unacceptable. I could understand why they had mutinied, and I was there to help. I said, I'm going to be your new camp commander from now on, and I'll teach you how to defend your homes better than any other auxiliaries, as we called them, would be able to do. I said, you just better, you'll follow me. I said, and I'll give you a little demonstration as to what's going to happen to anybody who points a weapon at me, which I did with my RPD. I flung my cap in some branches, and I walked away from it and turned around and gave it a squirt, and luckily I hit the cap and it fell down, and they all sat there wide-eyed, and not a chirp came out of them, and I got the message across. Anyway, I lived with them and trained them for 6 weeks. At the end, I trained them in marksmanship, in section battle drills, and anti-ambush drills and things like that. And they really became hot. I mean, they were exceptionally willing, and they tried hard. Changed their mindset. They were very gung-ho when I first got there. And they'd been indoctrinated that they were real hotshots. Well, they were far from that. But there was a way of bending their psyche to realize how incompetent they were without them seeing that I'm the problem and not them. Now, it happened in another camp similar to ours, that the camp commander didn't understand their mentality and how they viewed things, and they actually shot him and they murdered him there, because he was the problem and not them, as they saw it. Now, how I got them to turn around is in my book, and it's a long story, so I'm not going to go into that now.